Hey guys, tonight we are going to take a little trip back in time to the American Wild West. But hold on, we're not visiting the Hollywood version, the one with heroic cowboys, thrilling duels at high noon, and adventure around every corner. No, we're going to the real one, the gritty, smelly, and frankly, quite lethal version where, let's be honest, you and I would probably not survive the first 24 hours. It's a world where the biggest threat wasn't a gunslinger, but a glass of water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Drop a comment below and say hi. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your story begins not with a bang, but with a piece of cheap, flimsy paper. You're standing on a crowded, grimy street somewhere on the East Coast. Or maybe you're leaning against a fence post on a failing farm in the Midwest. It doesn't really matter where you are. What matters is how you feel. You're tired. Tired of the factory soot that coats your lungs, the suffocating air of the tenement, or the stubborn, unforgiving soil that has failed you one too many times. Life is a monotonous cycle of hard work for little reward, and hope is a currency you can no longer afford. Then, you say it, pinned to a public notice board, or perhaps thrust into your hand by an overly enthusiastic man with a wide smile and a cheap suit. It's a flyer. The headline is printed in big, bold letters, practically screaming at you. GOUEST, YOURFRTUNEAWAITS, or FREINDINTAGGANOFTHEWRLD. You take the paper. The illustration on it is almost painfully beautiful. It depicts a scene from a dream you didn't even know you had. A vast, open landscape unfolds under a brilliant blue sky. A man, who looks suspiciously happy and well-fed, stands beside a charming little log cabin with smoke curling gently from its chimney. His wife, in a spotless apron, is tending to a garden bursting with impossibly large vegetables. A river, sparkling like it's filled with diamonds, meanders through fields of lush, green grass where plump, contented cows graze. In the corner of the image, another man kneels by this magical river, holding up a gold nugget the size of a pigeon's egg. The text is even more seductive. It speaks of unlimited acres of fertile soil, free for the taking by any man with the courage to claim it. It promises a climate so pure and invigorating that it cures consumption and all manner of ailments. It whispers of rivers so full of gold that you can simply scoop it up with your bare hands. This, the flyer insists, is a land of milk and honey, a paradise on earth gifted by a benevolent government to its hard-working citizens. Of course, this is the first great, mainstream lie of the West, the powerful myth of manifest destiny, packaged and sold like a patent medicine. But here's a little detail they don't often mention: the sheer audacity of the claims. Some pamphlets, particularly those printed by railroad companies eager to sell the land alongside their new tracks, were pure works of fiction. They would describe Nebraska as a place with no winter to speak of, or Arizona as a wooded oasis. They were selling a fantasy, and business was good. These weren't just optimistic exaggerations. They were calculated deceptions. You read the flyer again, tracing the lines of the perfect little cabin with your finger. Your mind, weary from reality, starts to wonder, what if even a fraction of this is true? A life without the landlord banging on your door. A life where the food you eat comes from your own land. A life where a bit of luck could make you rich. The flyer conveniently omits any mention of the 2-0-mile journey, the blizzards, the droughts, the locust plagues, the cholera, the fact that the frail and might be a barren desert, or that it might already be inhabited by people who aren't keen on you showing up. Historians, of course, are still debating the true impact of this propaganda. How many people were genuinely naive enough to believe these posters wholesale? And how many were simply so desperate to escape their current circumstances that they were willing to cling to any sliver of hope? no matter how unbelievable. Was it gullibility that drove them west, or was it a calculated gamble, where the known misery of their present life seemed a far greater risk than the unknown dangers of the frontier? It's a question without a simple answer. But for you, standing there with that paper in your hand, the academic debate is meaningless. The lie is beautiful. It's a seed of an idea that begins to sprout in the barren ground of your life. You look up from the flyer at the gray, oppressive world around you, the noise, the smell, the crushing weight of it all. Then you look back down at the promise of sunshine, open space, and gold. The decision, when it comes, feels less like a choice and more like a surrender to the only dream on offer. That night, you can't sleep. The image from the flyer is burned into your mind. You begin to make a mental list, sow the old tools, say your goodbyes, tack what little you owe. The paper feels solid in your hand, a promise of a new life. You have no idea that the journey to claim that promise will be the first, and perhaps the last, great test of your entire existence. That beautiful, lying flyer has done its job. The dream of the West is now your obsession, and the first tangible step toward that dream is buying a wagon. Forget the massive, majestic Conestoga wagons you've seen in paintings. Those were the freight trucks of their day, requiring huge teams of oxen and far too cumbersome for a family. No, you get yourself a much smaller, lighter vehicle, often called a prairie schooner because its white canvas cover, seen from a distance, looked like a ship sailing on a sea of grass. The man who sells it to you wears it sturdy, built from the finest hardwood, ready for anything the trail can throw at it. You pay him nearly everything you have left. This cramped, wooden box on wheels is now your home, your bank vault, and your lifeboat all in one. Now comes the first truly painful decision: what to pack. The guidebooks, often just as misleading as the flyers, say to bring about 1,000 pounds of food per adult, mostly flour, bacon, coffee, and sugar. But what about everything else? What about the things that make a life feel like your own? That heavy cast iron stove, the rocking chair your grandmother gave you, the family Bible with generations of names written inside. You carefully load them, arranging your worldly possessions into this tiny 10 by 4 foot space. You feel a sense of pride, of preparedness. You are, of course, completely wrong. You've overpacked. Everyone overpacks. On the trail, you quickly learn that every single ounce matters. Every pound of sentiment is a pound of life-sustaining flour you can't carry. And so begins the great shedding. Your journey west is marked not just by the miles you cover, but by the things you leave behind. That beautiful rocking chair is one of the first things to go, abandoned on the side of the trail in the mud of Nebraska. You see others' discarded treasures: jail, heavy wooden dressers, iron-bound chests. Even, in one famous and possibly true account, a full-sized grandfather clock, standing sentinel in the middle of nowhere. This is a little-known fact of the trail. It was lined with the wreckage of abandoned dreams, the 19th century equivalent of leaving your furniture on the curb when you move. You join a wagon train, a long, snaking caravan of hope and desperation. The first few days have a kind of chaotic, festive atmosphere, but the romance fades as quickly as the road turns from solid ground to a thick, bottomless mud. Your life shrinks to the pace of a plodding ox, about 2 miles per hour. The world becomes a symphony of 3 sounds: the relentless creaking of the wagon wheels, the dull thud of your own feet on the dusty ground, and the constant, lowing complaints of the animals. You walk. You walk beside the wagon to spare the oxen, to guide them, to push when the wheels get stuck. You walk 10, 15, sometimes 20 miles a day, every day, for 2 to 6 months. The dust gets into your clothes, your hair, your food, your lungs. And then the real enemies appear, the ones the flyer never mentioned. First, there's your own wagon. That sturdy vessel proves to be heartbreakingly fragile. A wheel hits a rock and the rim splinters. An axle, dried out by the relentless sun, cracks under the strain. This isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a potential death sentence. While the men frantically work to make a repair, the entire wagon train is forced to wait, their impatient glares adding to your anxiety. Then there are the river crossings, There are no bridges. You face the churning, muddy water of the Platte or the Snake River, and you have to somehow get your life in a box to the other side. You cock the wagon bed, hoping to make it float, or you raise it high, praying the current doesn't sweep your animals, or worse, a family member, away forever. But the most terrifying enemy is the one you can't see. The trail is a highway for disease. You drink from a stream, not knowing that the wagon train a few miles ahead of you used it as a latrine. Cholera, a terrifyingly swift killer, spreads like wildfire. It begins with a stomach cramp and can leave a healthy person dead from dehydration in less than a day. Then there's dysentery, known grimly as the bloody flux, typhoid, and measles. You have no antibiotics, no IV drips, no understanding of germ theory. You just have folk remedies and prayer. This is where the Hollywood myth of constant shootouts and Indian attacks completely falls apart. While conflicts with Native Americans certainly happened, the single greatest cause of death on the overland trails was disease, by a staggering margin. It's one of those things that historians are still trying to pin down with precise numbers. What was the exact mortality rate? Some studies suggest around 4%, which sounds low until you do the math. On a trail of 300, 0 people, that's 12, 0 deaths. Other estimates push the number closer to 10%. That means for every 20 people you started the journey with, 1 or 2 of them would not make it to Oregon or California. The trail was, in many places, a 2-mile-long graveyard. The path marked by crude wooden crosses and shallow graves. As the sun sets, you circle the wagons. It's not for protection from attack, as the movies show. It's to create a makeshift corral for the animals. You are too tired to speak. The hope that filled you back east feels like a distant memory from someone else's life. Now, your only ambition is to survive until the sun comes up again. You chew on a piece of hard, tasteless bread, and you try not to think about the coughing you hear from the next wagon over. After months of unimaginable hardship on the trail, you finally see it, tucked into a rough, treeless valley or sprawled across a dusty flat. It's the settlement you've been dreaming of. This is your destination, the end of the line, the place where your new life begins. But as you get closer, the image from the flyer, that neat little town with its white church steeple, evaporates like a mirage. What you find instead is a chaotic, sprawling mess that can only be described as an organized disaster. Welcome to Boomtown. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight, but the smell. It's a thick, potent cocktail of odors, unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, frying bacon, animal manure, and the ever-present, cloying stench of human waste. There is no sanitation system here. There are no sewers, no garbage collection, not even a basic understanding of public hygiene. The main street, if you can call it that, is a wide, churned-up river of mud, several inches deep, dotted with garbage, discarded tools, and the occasional dead dog. When it rains, this street becomes a quagmire capable of swallowing a wagon wheel. When it's dry, the wind whips up a choking cloud of dust mixed with fine, pulverized horse manure. The buildings are a testament to hurried, desperate construction. There are no charming log cabins. Instead, you see a jumble of rough sawn timber shacks with canvas roof, ramshackle tents, and lean TOS made from scavenged bits of wood and metal. There's no planning, no grid, no sense of order. Structures are thrown up wherever a man can drive a stake into the ground, creating a labyrinth of narrow, crooked alleyways. The town looks like it was built in a week by people who didn't expect it to be standing by the next. And they were probably right. You find a spot on the edge of this chaotic settlement to park your wagon, which suddenly feels like a palace compared to the squalor around you. You arrive, but you have no land, no job, and the gold you dreamed of is nowhere to be seen. The first order of business is simply to exist here. You wander down the main street, a river of humanity flowing in both directions. It's a sea of men, young men, old men, men from every state and half a dozen countries, all drawn by the same feverish dream. Their faces are a mixture of wild-eyed hope and bone-deep exhaustion. They are prospectors, merchants, gamblers, drifters, and con artists, all swirling together in this temporary eddy of civilization. The soundtrack of the town is a constant, cacophonous roar. It's the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the braying of mules, the out-of-tune piano drifting from a saloon, and the endless chorus of shouting men haggling, arguing, laughing, and fighting. There is no peace here, no quiet corner to collect your thoughts. The energy is frantic, electric, and utterly exhausting. You quickly learn the local economy. Everything is absurdly expensive. The merchants who got here first, hauling supplies over the same trail you just survived, now have you at their mercy. A single shovel might cost you a week's wages, if you can find a wage. A bag of flour that cost $1 back east is now 20. This is a cold, hard fact of boom towns that is often overlooked. The people who reliably got rich weren't the miners, but the merchants who mined the miners, men like Levi Strauss, who originally went west to sell canvas for tents and wagon covers, but cleverly realized that the miners needed durable pants far more. You didn't find gold in a river. You found it in denim. This is your new reality. The paradise from the flyer has been replaced by a raw, unfiltered struggle for survival in a place that feels like the edge of the world. You see men sleeping in the open, huddled under their coats. You see makeshift signs advertising lodging a space on a dirt floor in a crowded tent for $1 a night. And you start to realize the terrifyingly precarious nature of this entire enterprise. A boomtown was a creature of pure speculation. Its existence was tied to the rumor of a gold strike or the promise of a railroad. If the gold ran out, or the railroad chose a different route, the town would die as quickly as it was born, leaving behind the ghost town of empty shacks and shattered dreams. Historians have long debated the social structure, or lack thereof, in these instant cities. Were they truly lawless, anarchic places, or did they develop their own informal codes of conduct and justice? The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in the middle. There was a kind of rough, pragmatic order, but it was fragile and could shatter in an instant. For you, a newcomer, you are at the absolute bottom of this chaotic food chain. You have no allies, no reputation, and your naivete is written all over your face. You are fresh meat. The con artists can smell you from a block away. The welcome you receive isn't a warm handshake, but the cold, calculating gaze of 100 strangers wondering what they can take from you. This isn't the beginning of a new life. It's the start of a whole new kind of fight. You've been in Boomtown for a few days, and a new, terrifying reality is dawning on you. It's not the threat of violence or the backbreaking work that's your most immediate problem. It's thirst. You're constantly, debilitatingly thirsty. The dry, dusty air sucks the moisture right out of you, and the work of just existing here leaves you parched. Finding something safe to drink will become your single greatest daily struggle. You look around for a well. There isn't one. The town was built to fast, with too little forethought for such luxuries. The only source of water is the same one that likely gave the town its location, a sluggish, brown creek that runs along the edge of the settlement. This creek is the town's lifeblood and its sewer, all in one. Upstream, you can see other prospectors panning for gold, stirring up mud and silt. You can see the camp's mules and oxen drinking from it, and worse, relieving themselves directly into the water. The camp's makeshift latrines, usually just crude pits dug a few yards from the bank, leach their contents directly into the soil, inevitably, into the groundwater that feeds the creek. Further up, you don't even want to think about what might be happening. A dead animal, perhaps, or the camp of another group of miners, who are just as careless as your new neighbors. Every cup you dip into that water is a game of Russian roulette. You can see things floating in it. You can smell it. You try boiling it, which helps, but you don't always have the time or the fuel. What is scarce and expensive. So, you take a chance. You fill your cup, close your eyes, and drink, trying not to think about the journey this water has taken to reach your lips. This is how disease, the true apex predator of the West, begins its hunt. The water is a perfect delivery system for a host of microscopic killers. Cholera, as you learned to fear on the trail, is the most dramatic. But there's also typhoid fever, which comes on more slowly with a headache and a fever, and dysentery, which turns your insides into a fiery agony. These aren't just uncomfortable illnesses. In an era without antibiotics or rehydration therapy, they are often a death sentence. Here's a particularly charming and often forgotten detail about 19th century waterborne illness, the miasma theory. Most people at the time, including many doctors, didn't believe in germs. They believed that diseases were caused by miasma, or bad air, which rose from rotting organic matter. So, their solution to the town's sanitation problem was to stop polluting the water source, but to avoid the bad smells. This, of course, did nothing to stop the spread of disease and may have even made things worse by creating a false sense of security. As long as you weren't breathing in the foul vapors, you thought you were safe. You watch as men, strong and healthy one day, are doubled over in pain the next, then gone within a week. Their empty bunks are a constant, silent reminder of the invisible war being waged all around you. You see makeshift hospitals, usually just a large, dirty tent where the sick are laid on the floor to either recover or die, mostly the latter. The only medicine on offer is usually laudanum, a tincture of opium to dull the pain, or calomel, a mercury compound, which was a powerful purgative that, in a case of cholera, would only hasten death from dehydration. So, what do? You're desperate for a safe drink. You might turn to the saloon, and this is a key reason why saloons were so central to Western life. Beyond just entertainment and vice, they often had their own will, or they sold whiskey. To you, a glass of whiskey seems like a much safer bet than a cup of creek water. At least the alcohol might kill whatever is in it. Right. This was a common belief, and it fueled the already rampant alcoholism of the frontier. Men would drink from sunup to sundown, not just for escape, but out of a misguided sense of self-preservation. Of course, the whiskey was often just as dangerous. It was frequently adulterated, and powerful enough to strip paint, leading to a whole different set of health problems and, as well, a lot of very bad decisions. The historical debate around this is fascinating. Some historians argue that the safety of alcohol was a primary driver of its consumption in the West, a rational choice in an irrational environment. Others contend that this is giving the average miner too much credit, and that people drank because they were miserable, isolated, and addicted. It's likely a complex mix of both. For you, the daily quest for water is a lesson in the fragility of life. Back home, you turned a tap and clean water came out. It was an invisible, unappreciated miracle. Here, every single swallow is a calculated risk. You start to notice the subtle signs of dehydration in yourself and others. The headaches, the dizziness, the dark, sunken eyes. You learn to jealously guard your personal water barrel, to see a rainstorm not as an inconvenience, but as a blessing from heaven. You are living in a state of perpetual, low-grade fear, not of a bullet in the back, but of a microscopic organism in a cup of water, and you realize, with a sinking feeling, that the gold you came here to find is worthless if you can't even find a clean drink. Now that you've grasped the horrifying reality of the town's water supply, your next priority is shelter. That trusty prairie schooner that got you here is not a permanent home. It's cramped. It offers no protection from the cold, and it marks you as a newcomer, a target. You need a place to call your own, a tiny patch of this chaotic world that belongs to you. You look around at the so-called buildings in town and quickly realize that your definition of a house needs a major adjustment. The dream of a sturdy log cabin, the kind you saw on the fire, is just that, a dream. Building a proper log cabin requires time, skill, and most importantly, a lot of trees. But you've landed in a place on the Great Plains or a dusty, arid basin where trees are as rare as honesty. The few that exist are jealously guarded and command an exorbitant price. A proper wooden structure, a frame house, is a symbol reserved for the saloon owner, the successful merchant, or the corrupt town official. So, what are your options? Your first, and most likely, home is a tent. You might have brought one with you, or you can buy a simple canvas sheet for an inflated price. This is shelter at its most basic. It keeps the worst of the sun off your head and provides a modicum of privacy. But it does little else. When the wind howls, as it so often does, your thin canvas walls flap and strain, threatening to rip away and leave you exposed. When it rains, water inevitably finds a way in, turning your dirt floor into a muddy swamp. And when the temperature drops, a tent offers about as much insulation as a paper bag. You'll spend your nights shivering, wrapped in every blanket you own, listening to the sounds of the camp and praying for morning. If you want an upgrade from the tent, you might try to build a dugout. This is exactly what it sounds like. You find a small hill or a ravine bank and you dig. You burrow into the earth like an animal, creating a cave-like dwelling. The front wall might be made of scavenged planks or stacked blocks of sod. A dugout has its advantages. It's surprisingly well insulated, staying cool in the summer and relatively warm in the winter. But it's also damp, dark, and prone to infestations. It's not uncommon to share your cozy earthen home with snakes, spiders, and field mice. And here's a charming little detail of dugout life. Sometimes the roof, often made of sod laid over a few branches, can become a miniature pasture for a stray cow, which might just fall through and join you for breakfast. Your most ambitious option, the pinnacle of frontier starter home real estate, is the sod house, affectionately nicknamed the soddy, since there's no wood. You build with the one resource the plains have in abundance, dirt and grass. You use a special plow to cut the prairie sod into long, thick bricks. These bricks, held together by the dense root system of the prairie grass, are surprisingly sturdy. You stack them up, grass sawed down, to build your walls. The roof is made of more sod laid over a lattice of precious, scavenged wood. A soddy is a step up, for sure. It's solid and fire-resistant, but it's also a constant maintenance project. The walls settle and sag. During heavy rains, the roof leaks, not with clean water, but with a steady drip of muddy ooze that can ruin your food and bedding. The dirt walls are a paradise for fleas, bedbugs, and other unwelcome guests. And perhaps the most unsettling feature, a little-known tidbit of sod house living. Things grow on the inside. In the damp spring, it wasn't unheard of for the interior walls or even the ceiling to sprout a fine layer of green grass or wildflowers. It sounds quaint, but imagine trying to sleep while your house is slowly turning back into a meadow around you. Historians are still piecing together the daily reality of living in these structures, often relying on the letters and diaries of the women who spent the most time in them. They write of the constant battle against dirt, the frustration of a leaky roof spoiling a precious bag of flour, and the psychological toll of living in a dark, cramped space that smelled perpetually of damp earth. Was it a cozy refuge or a dirt-walled prison? The answer probably depended on the day and on the person you asked. So you stand before your new home. Whether it's a flapping tent or a block of curated dirt, it is nothing like you imagine. It is a fragile, flawed shelter against a world that feels determined to break you. You look across the settlement at the other tents and sod dyes, and you realize that everyone here is in the same boat. They are all living in these temporary, desperate structures, clinging to the hope that one day they will earn enough to build a real house, with real wooden walls and a roof that doesn't leak mud. But for now, this is it. You crawl inside your dark, earthy shelter, pull a blanket over your head, and try to convince yourself that you are home. You have a roof over your head, sort of. Now you have to deal with another constant, grinding concern. Food, back east, even in poverty, there was a certain variety, a predictability to your meals. Here, in the heart of the Wild West, your diet shrinks to a monotonous, joyless, and often precarious cycle of a few key ingredients. The rich bounty of the land depicted on that flyer is, you guessed it, another beautiful lie. Forget about fresh vegetables and tender steaks. Your culinary world is now dominated by what the locals grimly call the 3Bs, bacon, beans, and bread, and not the kind of artisanal sorrel and thick cut applewood smoked bacon you might be picturing. No, this is survival food, stripped of all pleasure. The bacon is the cornerstone of your diet. It comes in huge, greasy slabs, heavily salted for preservation. It's so salty, in fact, that it's barely edible without being soaked in water for hours first. A risky use of your precious, dubious water supply. It's tough, it's stringy, and after a few weeks of eating it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the very smell of it frying will make your stomach turn. But it's calorie-dense and it keeps forever, so it's what you eat. Then there are the beans. Dried beans. Pounds and pounds of them. They are cheap, they are filling, and they take an eternity to cook. You'll have a pot of beans simmering over your fire constantly. You eat them plain, mixed with bacon grease, or mashed into a thick, unappetizing paste. They are the fuel that keeps the engine of your body running, but they offer no joy, only sustenance. Finally, there is the bread. This isn't soft, fluffy bread. This is hardtack, also known as pilot bread or sea biscuit. It's a simple, unleavened cracker made from flour, water, and sometimes a little salt. It's baked until it is, quite literally, as hard as a rock. This is by design. Its durability is its only virtue. To eat it, you have to break it apart with a rock, or the butt of a pistol, and then soak it in your coffee or stew until it softens to a vaguely chewable consistency. A common complaint about hardtack was its tendency to become infested with weevils, leading to the grimly humorous trail advice to eat it in the dark, so you can't see what you're swallowing. Here's a bizarre but true detail about the frontier diet. The near-total absence of fruits and vegetables lead to widespread chronic scurvy. We tend to associate scurvy with sailors on long sea voyages, but it was just as rampant on the prairie ocean. Men would develop bleeding gums, worse teeth, and excruciating joint pain, all from a simple vitamin C deficiency. They had no idea what caused it, and they blamed it on the bad air, the water, or just bad luck. This is where those peddlers of patent medicines made a killing, selling worthless bottles of flavored alcohol to men desperate for a cure. The tragic irony is that a simple plant like the prairie onion or a handful of wild rose hips could have cured them, but they often didn't know to look for it. What about hunting? The plains were full of bison, and the mountains had deer. Right, yes, but hunting was a time-consuming and often dangerous activity. You needed a good rifle, ammunition was expensive, and you needed the skill to actually hit a moving target. Even if you were successful, a single man or a small family couldn't possibly process and preserve an entire bison before it's boiled. So while a lucky hunt might provide a welcome feast, it was a reliable daily food source. The historical debate here often centers on the ingenuity of frontier cooks, particularly women. They were masters of culinary alchemy, capable of turning the same 3 boring ingredients into a dozen different, if still boring, meals. They learned to make sourdough starters to leaven their bread, using wild yeasts from the air. They figured out how to use bacon grease for everything, from frying to seasoning to waterproofing their boots. They were experts in making a little go a very, very long way. But even their resourcefulness couldn't change the fundamental poverty of the diet. The diaries of pioneer women are filled with longing for a simple apple, a fresh salad, or a glass of milk. So, your evening meal becomes a ritual of grim necessity. You sit on a crate outside your soddy, a tin plate on your lap. On it is a pile of beans and a chunk of salty bacon. You dunk a piece of hardtack into your bitter, chicory-laced coffee. You chew, and you swallow. You are not enjoying your food. You are consuming fuel. As you eat, you look out at the vast, empty landscape. There is no garden, no plump cows, no river sparkling with diamonds. There is only the wind, the dust, and the gnawing feeling in your stomach that is not quite hunger and not quite despair, but a weary combination of the two. You secured a rudimentary shelter and a monotonous food source. You might be feeling a sliver of confidence, a sense that you're starting to get the hang of this brutal new life. This is a dangerous feeling, because the greatest threat in your new home is not something you can see, fight, or build a wall against. It is microscopic, it is airborne, it is waterborne, and it is utterly indifferent to your struggles. It is the pervasive, ever-present threat of epidemic disease. Your boomtown, with its complete lack of sanitation and its transient, crowded population is a perfect incubator for germs. Think of it as a giant petri dish. Every day, new people arrive, potentially carrying new pathogens from wherever they came from. They live packed together in tense and filthy dugouts, sharing contaminated water, food, and air. It is a public health nightmare of epic proportions. The king of all terror is, of course, cholera. You've already learned to fear it. But living in the heart of the camp means you can no longer outrun it. You watch its terrifying progress firsthand. A man you shared a drink with yesterday is fine at breakfast. By noon, HES complaining of stomach cramps. By evening, HES in the throes of a violent illness that purges every last drop of fluid from his body. By morning, HES dead. The speed is what's so horrifying. It turns a strong, healthy person into a withered husk in a matter of hours. The cure administered by the local doctor, often involving bleeding or mercury-based purgative S, only makes a horrific situation worse. Then there's smallpox. Unlike cholera, which kills quickly, smallpox is a slow, disfiguring terror. It announces itself with fever and aches, then erupts into a horrifying rash of pustules that cover the entire body. Those who survive are often left blinded or scarred for life. Their faces a permanent, cratered reminder of the ordeal. Vaccination existed, but it was crude, not always available, and viewed with suspicion by many. An outbreak in a crowded camp could rage for months, leaving a trail of death and disfigurement in its wake. And the list goes on. Typhoid fever, spread by contaminated food and water, brings a slow, debilitating fever that can last for weeks. Dysentery, the bloody flux, is a constant, miserable companion in the camp. Measles, which you might think of as a childhood illness, could be deadly in a population of adults with no prior immunity. A simple influenza outbreak could sweep through the town, incapacitating half the workforce and killing the weak. Here's a small, but particularly grim detail about disease on the frontier. The bedding. In the crowded lodging tents or bunkhouses, you didn't get fresh sheets. You rented a spot, and when the previous occupant died, as they often did, sometimes in that very bed their blankets were not washed or aired out. They were simply passed on to the next paying customer. You could literally be wrapping yourself in the very same blankets that a man had died of smallpox or cholera in just hours earlier. The concept of contagion was so poorly understood that this was considered normal business practice. The academic world continues to debate the true demographic impact of these diseases. It's incredibly difficult to get accurate numbers. There were no official death certificates, no census takers in these ephemeral towns. Historians rely on diaries, letters, and the occasional newspaper account, but these are fragmented and incomplete. What was the true mortality rate in a place like Deadwood or Tombstone during an outbreak? Was it 10%, 20%? We may never know for sure, but the anecdotal evidence paints a picture of a society under constant siege from an invisible enemy. You live with a low-level, gnawing paranoia. Every cough you hear from a stranger makes you flinch. You scrutinize every meal, every cup of water. You start to avoid crowds, which is nearly impossible in a place like this. When you see a tent being hastily taken down or a new grave being dug on the lonely hill outside of town, you don't ask questions. You just make a mental note to stay away from that area. The psychological toll is immense. You are surrounded by death, but it's a random, senseless kind of death. It doesn't come from a dramatic gunfight. It comes from a shared ladle in a water barrel. It robs life of its meaning and replaces it with a feeling of profound powerlessness. You see the strongest men who survived the trail and the back-breaking labor of the mines. Brought low by a fever, you realize that all your strength, all your ambition, all your dreams of gold can be erased in an instant by something you can't even see. This constant, invisible threat is the true, terrifying background noise of your life in the Wild West. It's a silent killer, and it's always listening. Sooner or later, your luck is bound to run out. It might be a misplaced axe swing while chopping firewood, a fall from a rickety ladder, or a simple mule kick to the leg. In your old life, An injury, like a broken bone or a deep cut, was a serious, but usually survivable event. Here, in the heart of the wilderness, it's a life-threatening crisis. Your only hope is to seek out the town's doctor. You limp or are carried to a shack that has a crude, hand-painted sign out front. Dr. FINNESGOODF ELLOWPHYSICINSURGEON. The title doctor is a very loose term on the frontier. Dr. Shrive, good fellow, might have a genuine medical degree from a school back east, but it's just as likely he was a barber, a pharmacist's assistant, or simply a man who read a few medical books and decided he had a knack for it. There were no licensing boards, no regulations. Any man with enough confidence and a strong stomach could hang out a shingle and call himself a surgeon. You enter his office. It's a single, dirty room that smells of stale whiskey, unwashed linen, and something vaguely metallic. A wooden table, stained with the history of past procedures, sits in the center of the room. This is the operating table. On a nearby shelf, you see his tools laid out, a collection of saws, knives, and probes, none of which look particularly clean. You also see a large bottle of whiskey and a roll of dirty-looking bandages. This is the extent of his medical supplies. Let's say you have a compound fracture in your leg. The bone has broken and pierced the skin. Back east, a doctor might try to set the bone. Here, that's too complicated and too risky. The chance of infection in that dirty wound is nearly 100%. So, the doctor looks at your leg, shakes his head gravely, and utters the most terrifying sentence you can imagine. It'll have to come off. Amputation is the go-to solution for almost any serious limb injury. It's quick, it's decisive, and in the doctor's mind, it's the only way to prevent the inevitable gangrene. Now comes the procedure. There is no anesthesia. Chloroform and ether existed, but they were rare, expensive, and difficult to transport and administer. Your anesthesia is the bottle of whiskey on the shelf. The doctor pours you a generous cup of the raw, fiery liquid and tells you to drink it down. He might give you a leather strap or a piece of wood to bite down on. That's it. That's your pain management. Several strong men are called in to hold you down on the table. They are not medical assistants. They are just whoever was hanging around the saloon next door. The doctor takes another swig of whiskey himself for steady hands. He might claim picks up his bone saw and goes to work. The next few minutes are a blur of unimaginable, blinding pain and your own screams, muffled by the leather in your mouth. A good frontier surgeon was prized not for his delicacy, but for his speed. A leg amputation could be completed in under 2 minutes. He saws through flesh, muscle, and bone with brutal efficiency, tosses the severed limb into a bucket, and then cauterizes the stump with a red-hot piece of iron, nor by pouring boiling tar onto it. The smell of burning flesh fills the room. He then wraps the stump in a dirty bandage and the procedure is over. Here's a small, horrifying detail that underscores the primitive nature of this medicine. The concept of germs was completely alien. The surgeon would likely perform this operation in his street clothes, perhaps wearing the same blood-stained apron from the last procedure. He would use the same saw HED used on a dozen other men without washing it, believing that the blood and gore, what they called bloodable pus, was a healthy sign of healing. He would then wipe the saw on his pants and put it away for the next customer. The academic debate on this topic isn't about whether this was barbaric. It unquestionably was, but about the surgeon's own understanding. Were they charlatans who knew they were butchers, or were they genuinely doing their best with the knowledge they had? Most historians lean toward the latter. These men were products of their time, operating within a medical framework that was centuries out of date. In their minds, they weren't killers, they were lifesavers, choosing the lesser of two evils, a lost limb over a lost life. Your ordeal isn't over when the sawing stops. Now you have to survive the aftermath. You lie in your bunk, delirious with pain and fever, praying that the stump doesn't get infected, but it almost certainly will. The mortality rate for amputations was staggering, often over 50%. Your survival depends not on the surgeon's skill, but on the sheer, brute strength of your own immune system. If you do, by some miracle, survive, You are now permanently maimed in a world that has no place for the disabled. There are no pensions, no social safety nets. Your life as a miner or a farmer is over. You become a beggar, a town drunk, or, if you're really lucky, you might get a job as a saloon swamper, living on the charity and pity of others. You went to the doctor to save your life, and in a way, he did. But the life you have left is a shadow of what it was, a permanent, painful reminder of the brutal cost of a simple accident in the Wild West. You've managed to avoid a catastrophic injury in the doctor's terrifying saw. You've even, against all odds, managed to avoid cholera. You're starting to feel like a true survivor. And then, one morning, you wake up with a dull, throbbing ache in your jaw, a toothache. In your modern life, this is an inconvenience. You call a dentist, get a filling, and the problem is solved. In the Wild West, a simple toothache is not an inconvenience. It is a creeping, existential threat. The pain starts as a minor annoyance, but it grows steadily, relentlessly. Soon, it's a sharp, stabbing agony that makes it impossible to eat, sleep, or think. There is no dentist in your boomtown. The very concept of specialized dental care is a luxury reserved for the big cities back east. There are no drills, no Novocaine, no root canals. There is only the escalating, all-consuming pain. You try the standard frontier remedies. You might rinse your mouth with whiskey, hoping the alcohol will numb the nerve. It provides a fleeting moment of relief, followed by a searing burn. You might be advised to pack the cavity with tobacco, or a strange paste made of opium and tree sap sold by a traveling doctor. None of it works. The pain just gets worse, radiating through your skull, making your eye water and your ear ache. After a few days of this torment, you are desperate. You can't work. You can't function. You are willing to do anything to make it stop. Your options are few, and all of them are terrifying. Your best hope is that the town blacksmith, a man whose primary skills involve hammering hot metal, might also offer tooth pulling as a side business. His tools are not delicate forceps. They are the same crude pliers he uses to pull nails from a horseshoe. You approach him with a mix of hope and dread. The procedure is brutally simple. There is no anesthetic, save for another large gulp of whiskey. You sit on a stool, tilt your head back, and open your mouth. The blacksmith, with his massive, calloused hands, peers into your mouth, trying to identify the offending tooth. He clamps his pliers onto it. It's a firm grip, plants his boot on your chest for leverage, and pulls. What happens next depends on luck. If he gets a good grip and the tooth comes out clean, the relief is immediate and overwhelming, even through the agony of the extraction. But things can easily go wrong. He might break the tooth, leaving the infected root behind in your jaw. He might pull the wrong tooth. Or, in a particularly gruesome scenario, he might shatter a piece of your jawbone in the process. This is where a little known, but horrifying, medical complication comes into play. Ludwig's angina. This isn't something most people have ever heard of, but it was a very real killer in the 19th century. A simple dental abscess, an infection at the root of your tooth, is left untreated. The infection spreads from the tooth in to the soft tissues of the floor of your mouth and down into your neck. Your tongue swells to a grotesque size. Your throat closes up, and you slowly, terrifyingly, suffocate to death. All from a simple cavity. There was no cure. Once it started, it was a death sentence. Historians who study medical history often point to dental health as one of the great, unheralded dividends between the 19th century and the modern world. The amount of chronic pain and lethal risk that people lived with from their own teeth is almost impossible for us to comprehend. They had no understanding of the bacterial nature of cavities, attributing them to everything from toothworms to a moral failing. The debate isn't about the what, but the how many. How many people on the frontier died not from gunfights or cholera, but from the slow, agonizing complications of a rotten tooth. The records don't exist, but the number is undoubtedly far higher than any of us would guess. So, let's say your extraction is successful. The tooth is out. You spit a mouthful of blood onto the dusty street and stumble back to your tent, your jaw throbbing but the sharp, Nerve-deep pain finally gone. You've survived. But you're left with a gap in your mouth and a profound new fear. You look at the remaining teeth in your head, not as tools for eating, but as a collection of tiny, ticking time bombs, each one capable of starting the whole nightmare over again. You change the way you eat, chewing carefully, trying to avoid the hardtack. You hoard sugar, not as a treat, but as a precious commodity, unaware that it's contributing to the very problem you're terrified of. The simple act of eating is now fraught with anxiety, and you realize another harsh truth of this place. Survival here isn't just about the big, dramatic threats. It's a war fought on a dozen different fronts simultaneously, right down to the microscopic decay happening inside your own mouth. You've survived injury, disease, and dental agony. Your body is battered, but intact. It's your spirit that's starting to wear thin. The relentless grind of survival, the dirt, the bad food, the loneliness, it's all taking its toll. You need an escape, a place to forget your troubles for a few hours, a place to feel something other than exhaustion. And in a town like this, there's only one place that promises all of that. The saloon. You push open the swinging batwing doors, a feature that's more Hollywood than history. Many saloons just had regular doors. The scene that greets you is a sensory assault. The air is thick with a fog of cheap cigar smoke, so dense you can barely see the far wall. It smells of spilled whiskey, sweat, and sawdust that's been used to soak up God knows what. A Timmy, out-of-tune piano is being hammered on by a man in the corner, producing a sound that is technically music, but feels more like a cry for help. This is not the glamorous saloon of the movies. There are no dazzling showgirls in fancy costumes performing choreographed numbers. The entertainment is more likely to be a single, weary-looking woman in a drab dress, singing a sad ballad off-key. There are no witty, charismatic gamblers playing high-stakes poker with quiet intensity. The gambling you see is loud, desperate, and fueled by cheap alcohol. Men are hunched over tables playing faro, a fast-paced and notoriously crooked card game, or chuck-a-luck, a simple dice game designed to quickly separate a miner from his poke of gold dust. You make your way to the bar, a long plank of rough sawnwood resting on a pair of barrels. Behind it stands the bartender. H.E.S. not a cheerful, wisecracking confidant. H.E.S. a businessman, and his business is selling you oblivion at a high price. You ask for a whiskey. He slides a grimy glass in front of you and fills it from a jug labeled with a famous brand name from back east. But here's a little secret of the Frontier Saloon. You are almost certainly not drinking what you think you are. That jug is likely filled with a vile concoction known by many names. Tarantula juice, coffin varnish, or firewood. It was often raw, unaged alcohol, barely diluted, and then enhanced with other ingredients to give it color and a kick. Common additives included birch sugar, tobacco juice for that amber hue, and even strychnine or gunpowder to provide an extra jolt. This wasn't just a drink. It was a poison. It got you drunk fast, made you aggressive, and gave you a hangover of monumental proportions. It was cheap to make and highly profitable, the perfect business model for a town full of desperate men. You take a sip. It burns all the way down, but after a few more sips, a welcome warmth begins to spread through your veins. The sharp edges of your reality begin to soften. The constant anxiety in your gut recedes. The noise of the saloon, which was jarring at first, now seems friendly, uncommunal. You are, for the first time in a long time, not entirely miserable. This is the central, complicated role of the saloon in the West. It was so much more than just a bar. It was the town's living room, its community center, its post office, and its business hub. Men came here not just to drink, but to hear news from the outside world, to look for work, to make deals, and to find a moment of human connection in a profoundly isolating landscape. For a few hours, surrounded by the warmth and noise of other people, you could forget that you were 1,000 miles from home, living in a dirt-walled hovel. But there's a dark side to this camaraderie. The combination of desperate men, high-stakes gambling, and poisonous alcohol is a volatile one. Arguments erupt over a card game, a misplaced word, or, for no reason at all, The atmosphere can shift from boisterous to menacing in a heartbeat. You see two men at the far end of the bar, their voices rising. A shove turns into a punch. Suddenly, the whole room is a tense, swirling mass of shouting and posturing. This is where the real violence of the West happened, not in choreographed duels, but in clumsy, drunken brawls inside these smoky, claustrophobic rooms. The historical debate here revolves around the saloon's true function. Was it a necessary social institution that provided a vital release valve for the pressures of frontier life? Or was it a predatory enterprise that exploited the loneliness and desperation of the working man, trapping him in a cycle of alcoholism and poverty? The answer, of course, is that it was both. It was a place of community and a place of destruction, often at the same time. You finish your drink and decide to leave before the argument in the corner escalates. You step back out into the cold night air. The brief, artificial warmth of the whiskey is already fading, replaced by a familiar chill. The problems you were trying to escape are still there, waiting for you in your dark, lonely shelter. The saloon didn't solve anything. It just offered you a temporary, expensive, and dangerous slow-on moment of happiness. And you know, with a sinking certainty, that you'll be back tomorrow to take out another one. You've spent enough time in the saloon to see the simmering tension that lies just beneath the surface of boomtown life. You've seen arguments, shoving matches, and the occasional clumsy fistfight. But in the back of your mind, shaped by dime novels and sensational newspaper stories, you're still expecting the iconic showdown, the high noon duel, two grim-faced gunslingers, hands hovering over their holstered pistols, facing each other down on a dusty main street, while the terrified townsfolk peek out from behind curtains. Let me just stop you right there. This almost never happened. The classic, formalized duel, where two men agree to a fair fight at an appointed time and place, was a phantom of the East Coast and Europe, an aristocratic tradition that had no place in the pragmatic and chaotic West. The reality of a gunfight was something much uglier, much quicker, and utterly devoid of honor. One evening, you were nursing your terrible whiskey in the corner of the saloon, trying to mind your own business. The argument you've been half listening to at the faro table suddenly escalates. It's not about justice or honor. It's about a man accusing another of cheating at cards. Voices are raised. Insults are slung. One man, red-faced and emboldened by tarantula juice, shoves the other. The second man stumbles backward, his hand instinctively going to the pistol tucked into his belt. What happens next is a chaotic, terrifying blur. There is no formal challenge, no squaring off. The man who was shoved, feeling his life is in danger, draws his weapon. He doesn't aim carefully. He just points it in the general direction of his antagonist and pulls the trigger. The explosion is deafening in the enclosed space. The room fills with a thick cloud of acrid black powder smoke. For a moment, you can't see anything. Panic erupts, men dive for cover under tables or scramble for the doors. When the smoke clears, the scene is not heroic. The man who was accused of cheating is lying on the floor, groaning, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. The shooter stands there, his gun still smoking, a look of shock and drunken confusion on his face. He didn't win a duel. He just shot a man he was arguing with. More often than not, an innocent bystander, maybe the piano player or a man at the bar, is also on the floor, hit by a stray bullet. The firearms of the air were notoriously inaccurate, and in the hands of a drunk, panicked man. They were as dangerous to the people around him as they were to his target. This is the reality of a Western duel. It was an ambush, a back shooting, or a sudden, clumsy eruption of violence in a crowded room. Historians who have meticulously studied homicide records from frontier towns have confirmed this. The vast majority of killings were the result of drunken brawls, arguments over property, or robberies. The legendary fast draw artist was largely a myth. In a real gunfight, the winner was usually the man who was willing to shoot first, often without warning. Here's a curious, and often misinterpreted, fact. Many frontier towns had strict gun control ordinances. Places like Dodge City and Tombstone, famous for their gun-slinging reputations, actually required visitors to check their firearms at the sheriff's office or a designated hotel upon entering town limits. The image of every man walking down the street with a cold peacemaker strapped to his hip is largely a Hollywood invention. The townsfolk knew that a populace armed to the teeth, especially when mixed with alcohol, was bad for business and life expectancy. The violence that did occur often happened when these rules were broken or in the lawless areas outside the town proper. The academic debate on this subject is intense. Revisionist historians have worked hard to dismantle the violent West myth, pointing to statistics that show some frontier towns had homicide rates lower than modern American cities. Other scholars argue that this is misleading, as it doesn't account for the vast, unpoliced wilderness where countless acts of violence went unrecorded. Was the West a place of constant, bloody conflict, or a surprisingly orderly society whose violent reputation has been greatly exaggerated? The truth is likely that it was both, depending on the specific time and place. After the shooting, there is no dramatic posse formation. The lure, in the form of the town marshal, finally shows up. He was patrolling. He was probably asleep or in another saloon. He surveys the scene, listens to a few slurred, contradictory witness accounts, and hauls the shooter off to the town's makeshift jail, often just a reinforced shed. Justice will be swift and informal. A circuit judge might come through in a few months. More likely, a minor's court, a jury of local citizens, will be convened. The verdict will depend less on the evidence and more on the popularity of the men involved. You leave the saloon, your ears ringing. The brief escape you sought is turned into a visceral reminder of how cheap life is here. There was no glory, no skill, no honor. There was just a stupid argument, bad whiskey, and a sudden, violent death. The romantic image of the noble gunslinger, which you might have secretly held onto, is shattered for good, replaced by the pathetic picture of a drunk man with a smoking gun, looking confused about what he has just done. You've seen enough of boomtown life to know that you don't want to be a gold miner, a gambler, or a saloon fly. You crave the open space promised on that original flyer, the life of honest work under a wide open sky. And in the mythology of the West, there is no figure more iconic, more symbolic of that freedom, than the cowboy. You decide that's the life for you. You imagine yourself riding the lone prairie, a free agent with your trusty horse, answering to no one but the setting sun. Once again, the reality is a harsh slap in the face. You quickly discover that being a cowboy is not a lifestyle. It's a low-wage, seasonal, manual labor job, and it's one of the most grueling, dangerous, and monotonous jobs the frontier has to offer. Your new boss is a cattle baron, a wealthy rancher who owns thousands of longhorn cattle. He doesn't hire you for your rugged individualism. He hires you because you're cheap labor. You are, in essence, a migrant farm worker on horseback. Your first task is the roundup, where you and dozens of other cowboys spend weeks scouring a vast, unfenced territory, gathering all the cattle that have been grazing freely. This is difficult, dusty, and dangerous work, chasing stubborn cows out of thick brush and rocky canyons. Then begins the real ordeal, the cattle drive. The goal is to move a herd of 2,000 to 3,000 longhorn cattle from the plains of Texas up to the railheads in Kansas. A journey that can take 2 to 3 months and cover over 1,000 miles. Your life becomes a predictable, mind-numbing routine. You wake up before sunrise, gulp down some bitter coffee and bacon from the checkwagon, get on your horse, and ride. Your position on the dock depends on your experience. The most experienced riders take the point, guiding the herd in the right direction. The least experienced, like you, get the worst job, riding drag. You ride at the very back of the herd, literally eating the dust kicked up by 3,000 animals all day long. The air is a thick, choking cloud of dirt and manure. The weakest cattle, the ones most likely to be sick, are back here with you. Your job is to keep them moving, to chive along the stragglers, and to endure the constant, gritty misery of your position. The work is 15 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. At night, you don't get to relax in a saloon. You take turns on watch, riding slowly around the sleeping herd, singing softly to keep the notoriously skittish longhorns calm. A sudden thunderstorm, a clap of thunder, or a prowling coyote could trigger a stampede, the single most terrifying event on a cattle drive. A stampede is an unstoppable, thundering river of panicked beef. Your only job is to ride like hell to the front of the herd and try to turn them, to get them running in a circle until they exhaust themselves. Many cowboys were trampled to death, lost in the chaotic, dark confusion of a stampede. Here's a small, unglamorous detail about cowboy life. The food. It all came from the chukwaka, run by the camp cook, or kusai. The diet was even more monotonous than in town. It was beef, beans, and biscuits. Day in, day out. You might have fried steak for breakfast, boiled beef for lunch, and beef stew for dinner. The beef was fresh, at least, but without any other ingredients. It became incredibly tiresome. The coffee was strong and black, often boiled with the grounds until it was a thick sludge. This was your fuel. And what about the pay? For this life of constant work and mortal danger, you earn about $1 a day. At the end of the 3-month drive, you might have $90 in your pocket. A huge sum to you, but it rarely lasted. When you finally reached a cattle town like Abilene or Dodge City, you were a man starved for entertainment and release. The entire town was structured to separate you from that $90 as quickly as possible through whiskey, gambling, and prostitution. Many cowboys were flat broke within 48 hours of being paid, ready to sign on for the next miserable drive. The historical debate around the cowboy has shifted dramatically. The traditional view celebrated him as a heroic, self-reliant individualist, the embodiment of American freedom. More recent scholarship, however, has focused on the harsh economic reality. Historians now often frame the cowboy as an exploited member of a rural proletariat, a wage laborer in a vast, corporate-style agricultural enterprise. Was the cowboy a knight of the plains or a blue-collar worker on hooves? The romantic myth is powerful, but the economic evidence points strongly toward the latter. As you ride drag, the sun beating down on you, your face caked in a mask of dust and sweat, the romantic image you had of the cowboy feels like a cruel joke. There is no freedom here, only endless work. There is no solitude, only the constant, oppressive presence of thousands of bawling animals. Your trusty horse is not your friend. It belongs to the cattle baron. You are not an adventurer. You are a cog in a machine that turns grass into beef and ships at east. You look out at the endless, shimmering horizon and realize that this wide open space is not a symbol of freedom, but a dusty, lonely prison. The cowboy life washed for you. The work was too hard, the pay too low, and the dust tasted awful. So you drift back to the boomtown. But you're not the same naive newcomer you were before. You're tougher, more cynical, and you're still broke. The original lore of the West, the one that started this whole miserable journey, calls to you again, cold, not as a vague promise on a flyer, but as a real, tangible objective. You decide to become a prospector. You scrape together what little money you have and buy the essential tools. A pick, a shovel, and a flat, shallow pan. This is the classic image of the lonely prospector. And for a while, that's you. You head for the hills, away from the chaos of the town, seeking a quiet stream that hasn't been claimed yet. You find a spot, fill your pan with dirt and gravel from the creek bed, and squat by the water's edge. The process of panning for gold is a delicate, back-breaking art. You dip the pan into the water and begin to swirl it in a careful, circular motion. The idea is to wash away the lighter sand and gravel while the heavier gold, if there is any, sinks to the bottom. Your back aches from crouching. Your hands go numb in the cold mountain water. You spend hours, days, swirling and washing. At the end of the day, you peer intently at the blacks and left in the bottom of your pan. Most of the time, there's nothing, but then, one day, you see it. A few tiny, gleaming yellow specks. It's an incredible thrill, a jolt of pure, unadulterated hope. This is it. This is the proof. The gold is real. You work with a renewed, feverish energy. After a week of relentless labor, from sunup to sundown, you might have collected a small vial of gold dust. maybe worth a few dollars. It's barely enough to pay for your bacon and beans, but it's enough to keep the dream alive. But you soon realize that panning in random streams is a fool's game. The real money, if there is any, is in finding the source, the mother lode. This means you have to file a claim. You find a patch of land that looks promising. You mark it out with wooden stakes and a written notice, and you file the claim at the nearest district recorder's office, if one even exists. Now, your solitude is over. You are part of a mining camp, a community of other prospectors, all of you locked in a fierce, paranoid competition. Your neighbor is not your friend. He is your rival. You watch him constantly, trying to see if he is having any luck. He watches you just as intently. The moment you let out a whoop of excitement over a small find, you'll see other men start to drift closer to your claim, their eyes hungry. And here's a particularly nasty and common feature of this life: claim jumping. You might spend months working your claim, digging a shaft, following a vein, only to return one morning to find another man there, armed with a shotgun, insisting that your stakes were in the wrong place and this is now his land. You have two choices. You can fight, which can get you killed, or you can walk away, losing everything you've worked for. The law is a long way away, and possession is 9/10 of it here. This constant threat breeds a culture of secrecy and paranoia. You learn to work silently, to hide your tools at night, and to never, ever talk about your successes. The friendly, communal spirit you might have expected is replaced by a tense, wary silence. Everyone is your potential enemy. The academic controversy surrounding the gold rush often revolves around its economic impact. Was it truly a path to prosperity for the common man? The overwhelming evidence says no. For every one miner who struck it rich, there were 1,000 who ended up with nothing but broken health and shattered dreams. The popular image of the lucky prospector is the exception that proves the rule. The real fortunes were made not by finding gold, but by selling things to the people who were looking for it. It's a classic historical pattern. The real money is in selling the picks and shovels during a gold rush. As the days turn into weeks, the physical toll is immense. You are constantly cold and wet. Your hands are raw and calloused. Your diet is terrible, and the work is mind-numbingly repetitive. You are not an adventurer on a grand quest. You are a manual laborer, performing the same tedious task over and over, fueled by a lottery ticket-like hope. The initial thrill of seeing those first gold specks has faded, replaced by the grim reality of the odds stacked against you. You look at your meager vial of gold dust. It represents hundreds of hours of back-breaking work. Then you look at the other men around you. Their faces grim, their bodies stoop. You see the desperation in their eyes, and you start to wonder about the true cost of this dream. You came here seeking a fortune, but you are spending the only real currency you had: your time, your health, and your hope. The gold might be in the ground, but the price of digging it out, you realize, might be your own soul. You've been the victim of a claim jumper, or perhaps you've witnessed a violent saloon brawl that ended badly. Bleeding, angry, or just plain scared, you decide it's time to seek official help. You storm into the center of town, looking for the law, and you find him. He.S. a man with a tin star pinned to his wrist, sitting on a tilted back chair, whittling a piece of wood. This is the town marshal, the living, breathing embodiment of law and order on the frontier. Or so you thought. You pour out your story, expecting righteous indignation, the quick formation of a posse, and swift, decisive action. Instead, the marshal listens with a look of bored indifference. He might scratch his chin, spit a stream of tobacco juice into the dust, and say something like, "Well, that's between you and him," or sounds like you should have been more careful. You are stunned. You came looking for justice, and you found apathy. This is your first lesson in frontier law enforcement. The man with the badge is not always the hero. The job of a town marshal or a county sheriff was often a thankless, low-paying, and incredibly dangerous one. As a result, it didn't always attract the best and brightest. The man wearing the star might be a decent, brave individual trying to do an impossible job, or he could be a bully, a drunk, or simply a man who took the job because no one else wanted it. It came with the authority to carry a gun. More importantly, his power was severely limited. He might have jurisdiction only within the tiny, vaguely defined town limits. Your claim, just a mile up the creek, is out of his territory. He has no backup, no deputies, and no resources. He is one man against a town full of armed, drunk, and desperate men. His primary goal is not to solve every dispute, but to keep a lid on the chaos, to prevent the saloon brawls from spilling into the streets and to discourage the kind of random violence that would scare off new business. Your personal property dispute is very low on his list of priorities. Now, let's say the crime was more serious. A man was shot and killed in that saloon fight. The marshal does his duty and arrests the shooter, locking him in the jail, which is little more than a flimsy wooden shed with a barred window. But what happens next? There is no functioning court system here. A proper trial requires a judge, lawyers, and a jury pool, none of which exist in this temporary settlement. This is where a little-known and often romanticized institution comes into play, the Vigilance Committee. When the official law is seen as too weak or corrupt to act, a group of concerned citizens might take matters into their own hands. They are, in essence, a lynch mob, but they see themselves as providers of swift, necessary justice. They might drag the accused man from the jail, hold a trial that lasts all of 5 minutes, and then hang him from the nearest sturdy tree. They saw this not as murder, but as a civic duty, a way of cleansing their community of its worst elements. Here's a weird fact about these committees. They were often organized and led by the town's most respectable citizens, the merchants, bankers, and landowners. They had a vested interest in creating an environment of order and stability to protect their own investments. Their justice was oft unselective, targeting horse thieves and claim jumpers, but conveniently ignoring the respectable crimes of their own members, like price gouging or land fraud. The historical debate over vigilantism is a heated one. Were these committees a necessary evil, a grassroots democratic response to a lawless environment? Or were they simply illegal mobs that bypassed due process and engaged in state-sanctioned murder, often driven by prejudice and economic self-interest? There is no easy answer, and historians still argue about the legacy of these groups. For you, standing in front of the apathetic marshal, none of this academic debate matters. What matters is that you are alone. The badge, the symbol of order and protection that you took for granted back home, is here a hollow promise. It represents an idea of justice, not the reality of it. You realize that the only law you can truly count on is the one you can enforce yourself. This realization is a turning point. It's a moment of profound disillusionment. It forces you to become harder, more self-reliant, and more suspicious of everyone. You can no longer afford to be the victim. You might start carrying a pistol yourself, not because you want to be a gunslinger, but because you understand that in a place where the law is a suggestion, the ability to defend yourself is the only right that matters. The flimsy tin star on the marshal's chest is not a shield for you. It's a reminder that you are on your own. Your faith in the official law has been shattered. You now understand that you're in a world where you have to look out for yourself. But the threats aren't always as obvious as a man with a gun. The most dangerous predators on the frontier are often the ones with the widest smiles, the smoothest voices, and the most reassuring promises. You are about to enter the world of the con artist. Boomtowns, with their influx of naive newcomers and their distance from any real regulatory oversight, were a paradise for grifters, swindlers, and mountebanks of every stripe. They flocked to these places like vultures to a carcass, knowing they'd find a rich supply of desperate, hopeful people ripe for the picking. One day, a beautifully painted wagon rolls into town, and a man in a fine suit and a top hat stands up on a makeshift stage. He calls himself Professor Full ISB Farnsworth, and he has a miracle to sell. He holds up a small, dark bottle. This, he proclaims, is his celebrated panacea, a secret formula passed down from ancient Egyptian pharaohs. He claims it can cure anything on everything: cholera, consumption, rheumatism, boldness, and even a broken heart. To prove its efficacy, You might have a shill in the crowd, a secret accomplice who limps up to the stage, takes a swig of the panacea, and then leaps into the air, completely cured. You, and dozens of other hopefuls, are captivated. You've seen the sickness. You've felt the aches and pains. The promise of a simple, cheap cure is almost too powerful to resist. You hand over a precious dollar for a bottle of the stuff. What you've actually purchased is a worthless concoction of colored water, cheap alcohol, and maybe a dash of opium or cocaine to make you feel like it's working. By the time you realize you've been had, Professor Farnsworth and his painted wagon are long gone, on their way to the next town full of suckers. The patent medicine salesman was just one of many types of con artists. There were the land speculators, who would sell you a deed to a beautiful, fertile plot of land. When you finally found your new property, you'd discover it was a barren, rocky patch of desert ore. Even worse, at the bottom of a river, there were the gold finders, men with strange, scientific-looking contraptions who, for a fee, would use their divining rods to show you exactly where to dig for the mother lode. They would take your money and point to a random spot on the ground, leaving you to waste weeks of backbreaking labor. Here's a particularly clever and bizarre frontier scam: the salted mine. A swindler would find an abandoned or worthless mine shaft. He would then take a shotgun, load the shells with gold dust instead of lead shot, and fire both barrels into the walls of the mine. This would embed just enough real gold into the rock to make it look like a rich vein. He would then bring a potential investor to the mine, let you chip away at the salted rock, and discover the gold. Overcome with excitement, you'd buy the mine from him for an exorbitant price, only to discover, after days of fruitless digging, that you'd bought a worthless hole in the ground. Historians studying the social fabric of the West often grapple with the role of these confidence men. Were they simply a criminal fringe element, or did their activities reflect a deeper truth about the frontier ethos? An argument can be made that the entire westward expansion was, in some ways, a giant confidence game. The flyers, the railroad propaganda, the promises of easy riches, it was all built on a foundation of exaggerated claims and wishful thinking. The con artist was simply a more literal and personalized version of the same principle, selling a dream, whether it was real or not. The line between a visionary entrepreneur and a swindler was often blurry. As a newcomer, you are the perfect target. Your face is clean, your clothes are different, and your eyes still hold a flicker of that naive hope you started with. The con artists can see it. They see you not as a person, but as a mark. They prey on your fears of sickness, of poverty, of failure. They offer you easy solutions to complex problems. And in your desperation, you are tempted to believe them. After being swindled out of a few hard-earned dollars, a cynical frost begins to form on your heart. You learn to be suspicious of any offer that sounds too good to be true. You start to see the calculating look behind the friendly smile. You develop a kind of sixth sense for dishonesty. This newfound cynicism is a vital survival tool, but it comes at a cost. It erodes your ability to trust anyone. Every stranger is a potential threat. Every friendly gesture, a possible setup. You came west dreaming of community and opportunity, but you are learning that in this lawless land, the most important thing to guard is not your poke of gold dust, but your own gullibility. You've learned to navigate the treacherous social landscape of the boomtown. You can spot a con artist. You know which saloons to avoid, and you understand that the law is a concept, not a guarantee. You might start to feel a sense of mastery over your environment. And that's when the environment itself decides to remind you who is really in charge. The single greatest, most indifferent, and most powerful force in the West is not man, but nature. You've landed in a place of extremes. There is no gentle spring, no mellow autumn. There are only two seasons, brutally hot and dangerously cold. In the summer, the sun is a relentless, punishing tyrant. You are in a land with no shade. The sky is a vast, empty, bleached-out blue. The heat is a physical weight, pressing down on you from dawn until dusk. The air shimmers, the ground cracks, and any exposed skin is quickly scorched. Dehydration, as you learn it early on, is a constant threat. Your work, whether it's mining or building, becomes a slow, agonizing slog under the oppressive heat. Your soddy or dugout, which felt so damp and cold in other seasons, now becomes a sweltering oven. Sleep is nearly impossible. Then, just as you've acclimated to the furnace, the weather turns. The change can be shockingly abrupt. A blue sky can turn a bruise, menacing gray in under an hour. A warm breeze becomes a howling, bone-chilling wind that rips through your flimsy shelter and seems to penetrate right to your marrow. The winter arrives not as a gentle dusting of snow, but as a full-blown blizzard, a balloon order that descends with terrifying speed and ferocity. You are trapped in your tiny hovel for days on end. The world outside is screaming, wide void. The wind is a physical force, shaking your small dwelling, and its constant, maddening shriek is the only sound you hear. You burn through your precious supply of firewood or dried buffalo chips at an alarming rate, terrified of the moment when it runs out. The cold is an insidious enemy. It finds every crack in your walls, every gap in your clothing. You huddle under every blanket you own, your breath frosting in the air, a deep, unshakable chill settling into your bones. If you are caught outside when a blizzard hits, your chances of survival are slim. You can become disoriented in the whiteout just a few yards from your own door, wandering in circles until you collapse from exhaustion and freeze to death. The stories of settlers found frozen solid, just steps from their own cabins, are not tall tales. They are a common, tragic reality. Here's a bizarre and terrifying weather phenomenon you've likely never heard of. The grasshopper plagues. These weren't just a few insects. They were biblical in scale. A dark cloud would appear on the horizon, and you'd soon hear a strange, loud humming sound. It was the sound of millions, sometimes billions, of grasshoppers. They would descend upon the landscape and devour everything. They would eat the crops in your field, the vegetables in your garden, the leaves on the few pitiful trees. They would eat the clothes off your back, the wool from your sheep, and even the wooden handle of your shovel for its salt content. In a matter of hours, a promising farm could be reduced to a barren wasteland. There was nothing you could do but watch in horror. The historical debate around the environment of the West often centers on the concept of adaptation versus mastery. Early narratives portrayed the pioneers as heroes who tamed and conquered the wilderness. More recent environmental history, however, argues that the settlers never truly mastered the environment. They simply learned it, through brutal trial and error, to adapt to its harsh rhythms or they died. They were not conquerors. They were survivors, constantly at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. After the blizzard finally breaks, you emerge from your shelter into a world that is eerily silent and transformed. The landscape is buried under a thick, uniform blanket of snow. It's beautiful, in a stark and deadly way, but your first thought isn't of the beauty. It's of survival. Is your food supply intact? Are your animals still alive? You check on your neighbors, and the news isn't always good. You might find a nearby family has succumbed to the cold. Their struggle over it. This experience fundamentally changes your relationship with the world around you. You learn to read the sky, to notice the subtle shifts in the wind, to respect the power of the clouds on the horizon. You lose any romantic notions you had about living in harmony with nature. Nature here is not a gentle, nurturing mother. It is a vast, impersonal force that can kill you with heat, cold, or a swarm of insects, all without a moment's start. You are a tiny, fragile speck in an immense and unforgiving landscape, and your survival depends on a mixture of luck, preparation, and a deep, abiding fear. You've developed a healthy fear of the weather, the ultimate, impersonal threat. But the landscape holds other dangers, smaller in scale but far more personal. The wilderness is not an empty stage for your human drama. It's a place already teeming with life, and not all of it is happy to see you. You are an intruder in an established ecosystem, and its residents have their own ways of reminding you of that fact. Your daily life is now punctuated by encounters with the local fauna, and they are not the majestic, distant creatures from a nature documentary. They are immediate, often dangerous, and a constant source of anxiety. One of the most common and unnerving threats is the rattlesnake. They are masters of camouflage, blending in perfectly with the dry grass and rocks. You learn to never step over a log without first checking the other side. You learn to listen for that telltale, chilling rattle before you reach into a wood pile or a dark corner of your dugout. A bite from a rattler is not just painful. It's a medical emergency in a place with no real medicine. The folk remedies are useless, and a bite on the leg or arm could mean a frantic, desperate trip to the doctor for his saw. Then there are the larger predators. Out on the plains or in the foothills, the sound of a wolf or a coyote pack howling at night is not a romantic soundtrack of the wilderness. It's a direct threat to your livelihood. If you've managed to acquire a few precious chickens or a milk cow, that howling is the sound of something trying to steal your food source. You spend your nights in a state of nervous vigilance, a shotgun by your side, ready to defend your meager assets. And let's not forget the grizzly bear. In the mountainous regions, the grizzly was the undisputed king, a massive, powerful creature that was notoriously unpredictable and aggressive. While encounters were not a daily occurrence, the possibility of running into one while hunting or exploring was a constant, terrifying thought. A grizzly could kill a man with a single swipe of its paw, and your black powder rifle was a poor defense against a charging, multi-hundred-pound wall of muscle and fury. Here's a small but particularly irritating detail of frontier life. The pests. We're not just talking about the fleas and bedbugs in your soddy. We're talking about swarms of biting flies that could duck your cattle and men to madness. We're talking about clouds of mosquitoes rising from any standing water, carrying the risk of malaria or swamp fever. We're talking about prairie dogs, which seemed cute from a distance, but whose burrowing habits could create a minefield of ankle-breaking holes for your horse or ox. Your struggle against the wilderness was always a dramatic fight for survival. Often, it was a low-grade, constant war of attrition against a million tiny annoyances. The historical debate in this area often touches upon the concept of extirpation, the local extinction of species. The narrative used to be one of heroic pioneers clearing the land of dangerous vermin to make it safe for civilization. Modern environmental historians, however, paint a more tragic picture. They see the rapid, often thoughtless, slaughter of species like the wolf, the grizzly, and, most famously, the bison. This was just about safety. It was about clearing the way for a new economic model, ranching and farming, that had no room for large predators or competitors for grazing land. Was the war on wildlife a necessary act of self-preservation? Or was it the first chapter in a long story of ecological devastation? It's a question that still resonates today. Your perspective on animals undergoes a profound shift. You no longer see them through a lens of wonder or admiration. You see them through a pragmatic, and often ruthless, filter of survival. A deer is not a graceful creature. It's a potential meal. A wolf is not a noble hunter. It's a threat to your livestock. A snake is not a part of the ecosystem. It's a potential death sentence. You become part of the food chain in a way you never were back in the city. And you are not always at the top of it. You develop a new set of senses. You learn to recognize tracks, to interpret sounds, to notice the subtle signs of an animal's presence. You become more aware, more attuned to the world around you. But this awareness is born not of love, but of fear. The beautiful, wild landscape that once seemed so inviting is now, in your mind, populated with 1,000 hidden threats. Every rustle in the grass, every shadow at the edge of the firelight could be something that wants to bite you, steal from you, or eat you. You have been a prospector, a cowboy, a farmer. You fought the elements, the animals, and your fellow man. But we've been telling this story largely from a male perspective. To truly understand the harshness of the West, we need to shift our gaze and see this world through the eyes of the women who were there. If life was a struggle for you, for them it was an ordeal on an entirely different level. A life of relentless work, profound isolation, and unique dangers. Imagine you are a woman who has followed her husband on this mad journey west. Your world is not the mining claim or the cattle trail. It is the four cramped walls of the soddy or the dugout. This small, dark space is your entire domain. Your husband leaves at dawn to work, and you are left alone, often for the entire day. In the vast, silent emptiness of the prairie, your work is never, ever done. It begins before sunrise and ends long after sunset. You are responsible for cooking the same monotonous meals over the fire, a constant battle against wind and dirt. You are responsible for childcare, raising children in a dangerous environment, with no schools and no other families nearby. You are responsible for hauling the water, which is heavy and, as you know, potentially poisonous. You are responsible for mending clothes until they are more patched than fabric, for tending a small, struggling garden that is constantly under threat from drought and pests, and for maintaining some semblance of cleanliness and order in a house literally made of dirt. And then there is the childbirth. This is, without a doubt, the single most terrifying event in a frontier woman's life. There are no doctors, no hospitals, no sterile environments. When the time comes, you are on your own, or perhaps with the help of a neighbor if you are lucky enough to have one. The mortality rate for both mother and child was terrifyingly high, a simple complication that would be easily handled today, like a breech birth or a postpartum hemorrhage, was an almost certain death sentence. Every pregnancy was a gamble with your own life. This brings us to a little known and heartbreaking aspect of women's lives in the West, the constant, grinding fear of losing a child. Cemeteries on the frontier are filled with tiny graves. Children died from disease, from accidents, from the sheer difficulty of life. A woman might give birth to 10 children and be lucky if half of them survived to adulthood. The emotional toll of this constant cycle of hope and grief is almost impossible for us to imagine. Beyond the physical hardships, there was the crushing loneliness. Your husband, at least, has the camaraderie of the other men at the mine or on the trail. You have nothing. Weeks, sometimes months, could go by without you seeing another woman. The isolation was so profound and so maddening that it had its own informal diagnosis: prairie madness. Women, deprived of social contact and trapped in a monotonous, bleak environment, would slip into deep, debilitating depressions. Their diaries are filled with expressions of longing, of despair, of feeling like they are slowly going insane in the face of the vast, silent, and empty landscape. The historical debate surrounding women in the West has evolved significantly. The old narrative often portrayed them as silent, stoics on both saints, dutifully unpassively following their men. Modern historians have shattered this myth, revealing a much more complex and active picture. They have shown that women were not passive followers, but active partners, and often the key to a family's survival. They were economic contributors through their management of the household, their gardening, and their trade in things like butter and eggs. They were the ones who built the social fabric of new communities, organizing churches, schools, and social events. The debate now often centers on their agency. Were they reluctant victims dragged west against their will, or were they willing participants who saw the West, with all its hardships, as a place of greater opportunity and autonomy than the restrictive societies they left behind? It's a complex question, with evidence supporting both views. As a woman in this world, your struggles are invisible to most of the men around you. They see the food on the table, the mended shirt, the child that is somehow kept clean. They don't see the hours of backbreaking, mind-numbing labor that went into it. They don't see the silent fear you live with, everyday fear of childbirth, fear of disease, fear of the crushing loneliness that threatens to swallow you whole. Your battle is not fought with a pickaxe or a pistol. It is a quiet, relentless, daily war fought inside the four walls of your sod house. A war for survival, for sanity, and for a small sliver of hope in a world that seems designed to extinguish it. You've endured physical hardship, faced down danger, and witnessed the unique struggles of both men and women on this unforgiving frontier. You might think you've experienced the worst of it, but there is another affliction, one that doesn't break your bones or empty your pockets, but can hollow you out from the inside until there's nothing left. It's a sickness that has no name on a doctor's chart, but it's as real and as lethal as any plague. It's the profound, soul-crushing weight of loneliness. In your old life, even in poverty, you were surrounded by people. There was the noise of the city, the familiar faces on your street, the crowded factory floor, the chatter of a market. You were part of a dense human tapestry. Here, that tapestry has been shredded, and you are a single, isolated thread. If you're a prospector, you spend your days in the silent company of rocks and water. They only sound the rhythmic scrape of your own tools. If you're a homesteader on the Great Plains, you can look out from the door of your soddy and see nothing but an endless, featureless expanse of grass and sky, stretching to a horizon that seems 1,000 miles away. There are no trees, no hills, no landmarks to break the monotony. It's like living at the bottom of a giant, empty bowl. The sheer scale of the landscape has a way of making you feel infinitesimally small, insignificant, and utterly alone. At night, the silence is even more profound. It's a deep, ringing silence, broken only by the shriek of the wind or the distant, mournful howl of a coyote. You lie on your rough bunk in the dark, and your thoughts begin to circle. You think about the family you left behind, the friends you'll never see again. You try to remember their faces, the sound of their laughter, but the memories are starting to feel thin and faded, like old photographs. You are living in a sensory vacuum, and your mind, starved for stimulation, begins to turn on itself. This is the breeding ground for what was called prairie madness, which we touched on from the female perspective, but it affected men just as deeply. It wasn't a formal medical diagnosis, but a folk term for the psychological collapse that so many settlers experienced. The symptoms were varied: deep, unshakable depression, fits of weeping, paranoia, and sometimes a complete break with reality. Men would be found wandering the prairie, talking to themselves, their minds shattered by the sheer, oppressive weight of the solitude. Here's a small detail that highlights the desperate hunger for connection. The arrival of a mail carrier, an infrequent and unreliable event, was the most important thing that could happen in a month. People would travel for miles just to see if there was a letter from home. A letter was a tangible link to the world you left behind, a proof that you still existed in someone else's mind. To receive a letter was a moment of pure joy. To be passed over, to receive nothing, was a devastating blow, a fresh reminder of your isolation. Historians have debated the true nature of prairie madness for years. Was it a genuine, unique psychological condition caused by the specific environmental factors of the plains? Or was it simply a catch-all term for various and diagnosed mental illnesses like depression, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder that were exacerbated by the extreme stress and isolation of frontier life? The consensus leans toward the latter. The frontier didn't necessarily create madness, but it provided the perfect environment for it to flourish. Far from any community support or medical understanding, the slumber, as we've seen, was one response to this loneliness. It offered a temporary, artificial form of community. For a few hours, you could be surrounded by noise and other people, and you could use alcohol to numb the gnawing ache of your solitude. But it was a flawed and dangerous cure, one that often led to deeper problems. You find yourself doing strange things to combat the silence. You talk to yourself. You sing out loud, even if you don't know the words. You develop a one-sided conversation with your mule, your only companion. These aren't signs of insanity. They are desperate, rational attempts to fill the void, to hear a human voice, even if it's your own. You came west seeking independence and self-reliance. You thought of it as a noble goal, but now you understand the dark side of that ideal. Complete self-reliance is another word for complete isolation. You realize that human beings are not built for this kind of solitude. We are social creatures, hardwired for connection, for community, for the simple, reassuring presence of other people. The wild, open space that was sold to you as the ultimate freedom now feels like the ultimate prison, a cage made of empty miles and deafening silence. This invisible sickness, this loneliness, is the cruelest trial of all, because it attacks the very part of you that makes you human. You've battled your own loneliness, the environment, and the flaws of your fellow settlers. But all this time, we've been operating under the assumption that this land was empty, a blank canvas waiting for you to paint your new life upon it. This, of course, is the most profound and damaging lie of the entire westward expansion. This land was not empty. You and the thousands of others like you are not pioneers venturing into a verge in wilderness. You are intruders, encroaching on a world that has been inhabited for centuries. Everywhere you go, you see the signs of their presence. The strange circular patterns of stones on a hillside, the faint, well-worn trails that seem to lead nowhere, the arrowheads you occasionally find in the dirt. These are the footprints of the Native American tribes the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Apache, the Comanche, and dozens of others whose home this has been for generations. Your first encounters are likely tense and confusing. You see them from a distance, a group of riders on horseback, their figures silhouetted against the horizon. Your mind is filled with the stories you've heard, the lurid tales from dime novels and newspapers that paint them as savage, bloodthirsty warriors. Your first instinct is fear. You grip your rifle, your heart pounding, but the reality of your interactions is often far more complex and mundane. They might ride into your camp not to attack, but out of curiosity, or to trade. They might offer you buffalo robes or knowledge about the local terrain in exchange for things they value, like coffee, sugar, or metal goods. These interactions are fraught with misunderstanding. You don't speak their language. They don't speak yours. A simple gesture can be easily misinterpreted. A friendly smile might be seen as a sign of weakness. A stern look is a sign of aggression. You begin to see firsthand the devastating impact your presence is having on their way of life. The great bison herds, the foundation of their entire culture and economy, are vanishing at an alarming rate. They are being slaughtered by the thousand, not just for food, but by commercial hunters for their hides, and sometimes by railroad passengers who shoot them from the windows of their moving trains for sport, leaving the carcasses to rot on the prairie. For the tribes of the plains, this is not just the loss of a food source. It's the end of their world. Here's a small, but telling detail that reveals the clash of cultures, the concept of land ownership. You, with your stakes and your legal deeds, believe that you can own a piece of land. It is a commodity, something to be bought, sold, and fenced off. To the native peoples, this idea is completely alien. The land is not something that can be owned by an individual. It is a shared, sacred entity, the source of all life, meant to be used communally. Your fence, to you, is a symbol of security and ownership. To them, it is a scar on the face of the earth, an incomprehensible act of selfishness that disrupts the movement of the bison and the balance of the world. The historical debate surrounding the relationship between settlers and Native Americans is one of the most contentious and painful in American history. For a long time, the narrative was one of manifest destiny, a heroic, divinely ordained conquest of a savage wilderness. This view has been almost entirely rejected by modern historians. The debate now is not about if the westward expansion was a catastrophe for native peoples, but about the nature of the conflict. Was it a genocide, a deliberate policy of extermination by the U.S. government and its citizens? Or was it a more complex tragedy of cultural misunderstanding, broken treaties, and a relentless, unstoppable wave of settlement that overwhelmed the indigenous populations? This is a question that scholars and the public continue to grapple with, and the language used to describe these events is still hotly contested. You are not a soldier. You are not a government agent. You are just a regular person trying to build a life. But you are, by your very presence, an active participant in this slow-motion disaster. The small plot of land you were trying to farm was, just a few years ago, someone else's hunting ground. The water you drink was their water. You are the leading edge of a demographic tidal wave that is displacing and destroying a culture. You might feel a flicker of sympathy, a pang of guilt. You might even form a cautious friendship with a native individual. But ultimately, you are on opposite sides of an irreconcilable conflict. You came west to build a new future for yourself, but your future is being built on the ruins of their past. This uncomfortable, often unspoken truth hangs in the air, a constant, low-level hum beneath the daily noise of your struggle for survival. You are not just a pioneer. You are a conqueror, whether you want to be or not. You've given up on the dream of gold. And your small homestead is a constant battle against the elements and loneliness. But you've managed to acquire a small herd of cattle, your own little piece of the American dream on the hoof. You found a patch of open range with good grass and access to a small creek. For the first time, you feel a sense of stability. This, you think, is where you'll finally make your stand. Your peace is shattered not by a blizzard or a predator, but by the arrival of a group of riders. They are not cowboys on a drive. They are employees of a massive cattle corporation, a powerful ranching syndicate backed by investors from back east or even from England. The man in charge, a foreman with a hard, weather-beaten face, informs you that this entire valley, including the creek you depend on, is part of their traditional grazing territory. Your small herd, he says, is drinking their water and eating their grass. He suggests, in a tone that is not a suggestion, that you move along. You've just stumbled into one of the most brutal and least known conflicts of the Old West, the Range Wars. These weren't dramatic battles between cowboys and Indians. They were vicious and declared wars fought between different groups of settlers over the most precious resource on the plains. Not gold, but grass and water. On one side, you have the cattle barons. They were the first to arrive, and they operate on the principle of the open range. They believe that the vast, unfenced plains are a public commons that belongs to them by right of first use. Their business model depends on having free access to millions of acres of grass and water for their massive herds. On the other side, you have people like yourself, small-time ranchers and homesteaders, often called grangers or nesters. You've come to build a permanent life, to farm a small plot of land, and to raise a modest herd. And to do that, you need to fence off your property to protect your crops from the roaming herds and to manage your own livestock. Your fence is a declaration of intent, a symbol of a different vision for the West. To the cattle barons, your fence is a declaration of war. It carves up their open range, blocks their cattle from reaching water, and threatens their entire way of life. They see you not as a fellow pioneer, but as a parasite, a nester who is destroying the land for everyone. The conflict starts with intimidation. Their cowboys might ride along your fence line, cutting the wires. They might drive a large herd of their cattle right through your struggling cornfield, trampling it to dust. They might camp upstream from your cabin, deliberately fouling your only water source. They want to make your life so miserable that you give up and leave. Here's a particularly insidious tactic used in these wars: the control of water rights. A large cattle outfit would strategically buy or claim all the land immediately surrounding the sources of water, the rivers, the springs, the creeks. By controlling the water, they effectively controlled all the surrounding grazing land for miles in every direction, starving out any smaller competitors. When intimidation doesn't work, the conflict escalates to violence. This is not the violence of the saloon brawl. It's cold, calculated, and deadly. You might find your cattle shot dead, your barn burned to the ground in the middle of the night. Men on both sides start carrying rifles, and chance encounters on the range become tense standoffs. Hired guns, professional gunmen with no allegiance to anything but a paycheck, are brought in by the large outfits to terrorize the smaller settlers. The most famous of these conflicts was the Johnson County War in Wyoming in 1892, but smaller, unrecorded range wars erupted all across the West. The historical debate around these events often centers on the theme of class conflict. Was this a romantic battle between the rugged individualist homesteader and the powerful cattle king? Or was it, more accurately, a classic struggle between labor and capital? Many historians now view it as a conflict between two different forms of capitalism: the large-scale, corporate ranching model versus the small-scale, agrarian model. It was a fight for the very soul and future of the American West. You are caught in the middle of this. The lure, as you've already learned, is of little help. The local sheriff is likely on the payroll of the big cattle outfit, or he has to intimidated to act. You are outmanned, outgunned, and outfinanced. Your only allies are your fellow homesteaders, who are just as vulnerable as you are. You band together for protection, creating your own informal militias. Every day is lived with a low-grade fear, a constant looking over your shoulder. The open range that once seemed to promise freedom now feels like a battlefield. You are no longer just fighting nature. You are fighting a war against your own countrymen, a war over a few blades of grass and a trickle of muddy water. You have survived the range war, at least for now. A fragile, tense peace has settled over the valley. You've managed to hold on to your small piece of land through sheer, stubborn grit. And then, you hear the news you've been waiting for. The news that promises to change everything, to finally connect your isolated world to the civilization you left behind. The railroad is coming. A wave of optimism sweeps through the community. The railroad is seen as a messiah, a magical iron ribbon that will bring prosperity and an end to your isolation. It means you'll be able to sell your cattle or your crops to markets back east for a much better price. It means manufactured goods, tools, clothing, maybe even a real glass window for your sari will become cheaper and more accessible. It means mail will arrive regularly. And maybe, just maybe, this dusty, forgotten settlement will finally become a real tale. The construction itself is a spectacle. A small army of laborers, mostly Irish and Chinese immigrants, works its way across the landscape with brutal efficiency. You watch them lay the tracks, a symphony of sledgehammers and sweat, transforming the empty prairie day by day. The arrival of the first train is a cause for a massive celebration. The entire town gathers to watch the smoke-belching locomotive chug into view, a noisy, powerful symbol of progress and modernity. It feels like the beginning of a new era, and it is, but not in the simple, wonderful way you imagine. The railroad, you quickly discover, is not a benevolent savior. It's a ruthless, monopolistic corporation with its own agenda, and you are now completely at its mercy. The first shock comes when you try to ship your goods. You find there is only one railroad line serving your town. There is no competition. They can, and do, charge whatever they want. The freight rates are extortionate, set so high that they eat up almost all of your potential profit. You are working yourself to the bone only to hand over the majority of your earnings to a faceless corporation 1,000 miles away. You've escaped the tyranny of the cattle baron only to fall under the thumb of the railroad tycoon. Then there's the matter of land. The government, in its eagerness to see the West developed, had given the railroad companies massive land grants, millions of acres of prime real estate on either side of their tracks. The railroad is now the biggest landowner in the territory, and it sells this land to new settlers at inflated prices. This brings a fresh wave of people, which leads to more conflict over land and water, and further marginalizes the very people who were there first. Here's a small, but revealing, consequence of the railroad's arrival. The death of the cattle drive. The iconic image of the cowboy moving thousands of cattle over hundreds of miles becomes obsolete almost overnight. Why spend 3 months on a dangerous trail when you can load your cattle onto a train and have them in the Chicago stockyards in a matter of days? The cowboy's role is diminished. His world shrinks from the open range to the confines of a single ranch. The railroad, in its efficiency, kills the very myth it helped to create. The historical debate around the railroads is complex and multifaceted. The traditional narrative celebrated them as the great unifiers of the nation, the engines of progress that won the West. Revisionist historians, however, have painted a much darker picture, focusing on the ruthless business practices, the political corruption with railroad barons essentially buying politicians, and the exploitation of both workers and farmers. Were the railroads a net positive, a necessary evil for national development? Or were they predatory monopolies that created a new form of economic feudalism on the frontier? The consensus is that they were both, a force of immense creation and immense destruction simultaneously. The railroad also changes the very character of your town. Along with goods and new settlers, it brings professional gamblers, more sophisticated con artists, and corporate agents. The informal culture of the boomtown begins to be replaced by a more stratified, more impersonal society. The bank, the railroad office, and the grain elevator become the new centers of power, and the men who run them, not the man with the quickest draw, are the ones who hold the real authority. You stand at the new depot, watching a train pull away, loaded with the fruits of your labor. You are more connected to the outside world than ever before, but you also feel more powerless. The problems you face are no longer as simple as a dry well or a belligerent neighbor. They are complex, economic forces, controlled by distant men in faraway boardrooms. The railroad didn't bring the salvation you hoped for. It just brought a new, more modern set of problems, wrapping your wild, unpredictable world in invisible iron chains of commerce. Years have passed. You've weathered the storms, both literal and metaphorical. The railroad, for all its faults, did bring a semblance of stability. Your town grew, your study was replaced by a small frame house, and you even managed to put a little money aside. You are no longer just surviving. You are, by the standards of this place, a success. You are a fixture, an old-timer who remembers the early days. But the foundation of your town's prosperity was always precarious. It was built on a single resource. Maybe it was the gold in the nearby hills, the silver in the mountains, or the brief but intense demand for your town as a cattle shipping hub. The entire economy, the entire reason for the town's existence, was tied to this one thing, and one day, it runs out. The news spreads not like a wildfire, but like a slow, creeping chill. The main vein in the Excelsior mine has played out. The price of silver has crashed due to new government policies back east. Or perhaps the railroad has decided to build a new, more direct line 50 miles to the south, making your cattle depot irrelevant. At first, people are in denial. They say it's just a temporary slump, that a new gold strike is just around the corner. But as the weeks turn into months, the grim reality sets in. The boom is over. The decline is the story of the boomtown played in reverse, but faster and sadder. The first to leave are the opportunists, the gamblers, the saloon owners, the merchants who were only ever there for the quick profit. One day, the grandly named Palace Saloon is open for business. The next, its doors are boarded up and its owner is on the eastbound train. The population begins to thin out. A slow, steady exodus of the hopeful, the vibrant, chaotic noise of the town is replaced by an unsettling quiet. The constant clang of the blacksmith's hammer fades away. The tinny piano falls silent. You can walk down the main street at midday and see only a handful of people, their faces etched with worry. For sale signs, hastily painted on scraps of wood, begin to appear on houses and businesses. But there are no buyers. You watch as families you've known for years pack their meager belongings back into the same kind of wagons that brought them here. There are tearful, hurried goodbyes. They are starting over, again, heading for the next rumored boomtown, the next sliver of hope. Each departure is a blow to the town's spirit, another thread pulled from its unraveling social fabric. Here's a small, poignant detail of a dying town. The school, for a few brief, proud years, the town had a one-room schoolhouse, a potent symbol of its permanence and its commitment to the future. Now, there are not enough children left to fill it. The schoolteacher, a young woman from back east, quietly packs her bags. The day the schoolhouse door is nailed shut is the day everyone knows, deep down, that there is no future here. Historians who study the phenomenon of ghost towns often focus on the economic and environmental factors that cause their demise. But there's also a powerful human story that is sometimes lost. What did it feel like to watch your entire world dissolve around you? The debate often circles around the idea of community attachment. Did the transient, individualistic nature of boomtown life mean that people left without a second thought? Or did they, even in these rough, temporary places, form genuine bonds and a sense of belonging that made leaving a truly painful experience? The letters and diaries from these periods suggest the latter. People mourned the loss of their communities, even the flawed and difficult ones. You are faced with a terrible choice. Do you stay, or do you go? Your house, your land, it's worthless now. Everything you built, everything you've worked for, is tied to this place, and this place is dying. You could join the exodus, become a wanderer again, chase another dream. But you are older now. The thought of starting over from scratch, of enduring all those hardships again, is utterly exhausting. So you stay, you and a handful of other stubborn souls. People too old, too tired, or too attached to leave. You watch as the forces of nature begin to reclaim the town. The wooden sidewalks rot and collapse. The relentless wind peels the paint from the abandoned storefronts, which grow up in the middle of the main street. The empty houses, with their dark, vacant windows, look like hollowed skulls. You are no longer living in a town. You are the caretaker of a graveyard of dreams. You sit on your porch in the evenings, the silence broken only by the creak of a loose shutter swinging in the wind. You look at the ghost of the town you helped build, and you are haunted by the question that every survivor asks, was it worth it? You are one of the last ones left. The wind whistles through the empty windows of the Palace Saloon, and dust devils dance down the silent main street. You've outlasted the gold rush, the cattle barons, the blizzards, and the plagues, by any objective measure. You are a survivor, a winner in the brutal game of the West. But as you sit on the porch of your small house, looking out at the skeletal remains of the town, you don't feel like a winner. You feel the immense, crushing weight of what you've lost. Your body is a roadmap of your journey. Your hands are gnarled and permanently calloused. Your back is stooped from years of hard labor. You have a persistent cough from all the dust, and a few missing teeth from that encounter with the blacksmith's pliers. You are old before your time. Your youth traded for a patch of worthless land and a collection of painful memories. But the physical toll is nothing compared to the emotional one. You are a repository of ghosts. You close your eyes and you can see them all. The young man with hope in his eyes who shared your wagon on the Oregon Trail, who died of cholera before he ever saw the mountains. The woman in the next soddy who lost 2 children to diphtheria in a single winter. The hot-headed prospector who was shot over a card game. The family that gave up and headed back east. Their faces a mask of defeat. All the faces, all the voices, all the people who started this journey with you, or who you met along the way, the vast majority of them are gone. They are buried on a lonely hillside, or they simply vanish, swallowed by the vastness of the continent. You are left with the survivor's burden, the nagging, unanswerable question of why me? Why did you live when so many others, who were stronger, smarter, or kinder, perished? There is no good answer. It was luck, a random confluence of events. You happened to drink from the clean part of the stream. You happened to be inside when the blizzard hit. Your constitution was just slightly stronger. It feels like a cruel joke. Here's a little-known psychological aspect of survival that historians and psychologists have discussed. The guilt. It seems counterintuitive, but many survivors of traumatic events experience a profound sense of guilt for having lived. They feel they didn't deserve to make it, that they've somehow stolen a spot from someone more worthy. This can lead to a lifetime of depression and a feeling of alienation from the world. The historical debate here often revolves around the long-term consequences of the frontier experience on the American character. The traditional frontier thesis, proposed by historian Frederick Jackson Turner, argued that the West forged a uniquely American identity, rugged, individualistic, and democratic. It was a positive, nation-building experience. More critical historians, however, argue that this is a dangerously romantic myth. They contend that the frontier experience also forged darker traits, a tolerance for violence, a disregard for the environment, a deep-seated suspicion of outsiders, and a legacy of racial and class conflict. Was the West a crucible that purified the American spirit, or a cauldron that brewed some of its most toxic poisons? The question is fundamental to understanding the nation's identity. You are the living embodiment of that debate. You are, without a doubt, more self-reliant. You have to be, but you are also more cynical, less trusting. You've seen the absolute worst of human nature, and it has left a permanent scar on your soul. The optimism that drove you west has been burned away, replaced by a hard, weary pragmatism. You think back to that original fire, the one with the happy family and the sparkling river. It seems like a dispatch from another planet, a life you can no longer even imagine. The promise was a lie, but it was a powerful one. It was a dream of a place where a person could start fresh, where hard work would be rewarded, where the land offered limitless opportunity. The reality was a grinding, brutal struggle that broke most people and left the survivors, like you, irrevocably changed. You look at your hands, the hands that built a life in this impossible place. You survive, but as the sun sets, casting lonely shadows across the ghost town, you are forced to confront the ultimate, bitter truth. You won the battle for the West, but you may have lost yourself in the process. You sit on your porch as the years continue to bleed into one another, the seasons turning with a slow, indifferent rhythm. The ghost town around you decays, its wooden bones slowly returning to the earth. You are a living relic, a strange curiosity to the few travelers who might pass through. And then, one day, something bizarre starts to happen. Your story, the one you lived, the one filled with filth, disease, and casual brutality, starts to be told back to you. But it's been transformed. A man from back east, a writer with a slick suit and a notebook, comes to visit. He wants to hear your stories of the Old West. You tell him about the cholera, the back-breaking war, the loneliness. You tell him about the time the blacksmith pulled your tooth with a pair of rusty pliers. He listens politely, nods, and writes in his notebook. A few months later, someone sends you a copy of a dime novel he has written. You read it, and you don't recognize the world it describes in his story. The boomtown is a thrilling place of adventure. The gritty, desperate miners are transformed into brave, noble prospectors. The drunken, clumsy saloon brawls are remade into heroic, fast-draw duels between good and evil. The con artists are witty rogues. The tired, overworked cowboys are knights of the plains, riding free under the endless sky. Your story, your real, painful life, has been sanded down, polished, and coated in a thick, shiny varnish of romance. This is the birth of the legend. It's a process happening all across the country. Writers like Ned Buntline and Owen Wister, painters like Frederick Remington, and later, the fledgling motion picture industry, are all discovering that the public has a voracious appetite for a simplified, heroic version of the West. They are not interested in the historical reality. They are interested in a myth, a national creation story. And you, the survivor, are caught in the middle of this transformation. Your memories of fear and squalor are being replaced by a popular narrative of courage and adventure. Here's a strange but true phenomenon. The power of myth is so strong that it can even begin to alter the memories of the people who were there. You might find some of your fellow old-timers starting to tell their stories in a more heroic light, conveniently forgetting the misery and emphasizing the moments of excitement. They become performers, living up to the legend that has been created around them. The historical debate here is fascinating. Why did this romantic myth become so powerful, so central to the American identity? One theory is that the nation, in the late 19th century, was grappling with the messy realities of industrialization, urbanization, and mass immigration. The Wild West myth offered a comforting escape, a vision of a simpler, purer time when individuals were masters of their own destiny. It was a nostalgic fantasy created to soothe the modern, anxious society. Historians argue about the consequences of this myth-making. Does it provide a harmless and entertaining set of cultural symbols, or does it actively obscure the real, often brutal, history of conquest and exploitation, making it harder for the nation to reckon with its past? You are watching this process unfold from your lonely porch. You see the first tourists arrive, drawn by the exciting stories. They want to see the saloon where the famous gunfight happened, the one that was actually just a pathetic, drunken shooting. They want to have their picture taken in front of the haunted mine, where men died not in a dramatic cave-in, but from the slow, grinding misery of lung disease. Your reality has become their theme park. You are the last living link to the truth, but you realize that no one wants to hear it. The truth is complicated, it's ugly, and it's deeply uncomfortable. The legend is simple, it's exciting, and it makes people feel good. In the battle between truth and legend, the legend almost always wins, so use it there, a silent witness to the final, and perhaps cruelest, irony of your life. After surviving everything the real West could throw at you, you are now forced to watch as it is erased, replaced by a fiction, the world you knew. The one that is written in the scars on your body and the ghosts in your memory is fading away. In its place rises a myth, as shiny, as beautiful, and as false as the picture on that flyer that started your journey so many long years ago. The sun finally dips below the horizon, painting the sky in soft, bruised colors of purple and orange. The wind that has been your constant, nagging companion all these years dies down to a gentle whisper. The silence that was once so oppressive now feels like a soft, heavy blanket. The ghosts of the town, the ghosts of your past, seem to recede with the fading light. They are still there, of course. They will always be there, but their edges have softened. Their voices have grown quiet. You lean your head back against the worn wood of your chair, and your eyelids feel heavy. The tension that has lived in your shoulders for a lifetime begins to finally, slowly, release its grip. You are no longer on the trail, no longer listening for the rattle of a snake or the sound of a drake off from the next hit. You are no longer fighting. The struggle is over. The endless, rolling prairie that once seemed like a vast, empty prison now looks different in the twilight. It seems peaceful, a quiet sea under a canopy of brilliant, indifferent stars. Your breathing deepens, slowing to match the gentle rhythm of the crickets that have begun their nightly course. The world contracts, shrinking down to the simple sensation of the cool night air on your skin, the solid feel of the porch beneath your feet. You are drifting now, floating on a calm, quiet current, letting the long, hard day, the long, hard light, slip away into the soft, welcoming darkness. The end of the article. Good night.